Mom's sick. So I came instead. A little girl walked into the CEO's office. What the millionaire did next changed their lives forever. Excuse me. Sir. I came to work for my mommy today. She's sick and had to go to the hospital. Robert Whitmore's head snapped up from his desk. Startled. Mondays were a whirlwind of merger strategies. Quarterly earnings. And back-to-back meetings, not 5-year-olds in janitor uniforms standing in the doorway of his penthouse office. She stood there. A small, serious figure framed by the imposing mahogany door. Her golden curls glowing like a halo beneath the cool fluorescent lights. The uniform she wore hung off her tiny frame. Its sleeves rolled up repeatedly and the pants cinched tight with a bright pink shoelace. In one hand, she clutched a spray bottle with fierce determination. In the other, a neatly folded rag. My name is Amy, she added proudly, her voice clear and unwavering. My mommy's name is Pamela. She works here. But she's really sick today. So I came instead. I know what she does. She told me. Robert stared. A dozen bewildered thoughts racing through his mind. Was this some kind of elaborate prank? But the look in her eyes, sincere, steady, and full of purpose, told him otherwise. She genuinely believed this mission was hers to carry out. He rose slowly from his leather chair, careful not to startle her. Amy, he said, his voice softer than he'd used all day. How did you get here? She looked down at her scuffed pink sneakers. I took the bus. Mommy showed me the stops. I used quarters from my piggy bank. You took the bus. By yourself? Robert asked, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. She nodded matter-of-factly. I remembered the building. It's the tall one with shiny glass and your company's name in big gold letters. One time we passed it. And I told Mommy I wanted to be a CEO here one day. She laughed. But I meant it. Robert's stern expression softened into something resembling a smile. She continued. Her voice calm but earnest. A story tumbling out of her. This morning, Mommy couldn't sit up. She was dizzy and said her chest hurt real bad. I gave her water and told our neighbor, Mrs. Collins. Then I remembered. Mommy said if she misses work again, she might lose her job. So I came. I didn't want her to get in trouble. Robert sat back down. His hands folded on his desk. He had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking. But this tiny 5-year-old girl was systematically undoing him with every word. You came here to save your mom's job, he stated. More to himself than to her. Amy nodded. Her resolve absolute. She works really hard. She's the best mommy. He let out a breath. Slow and heavy. This child had made it all the way to his office. Alone. Somehow. She had slipped past security. Navigated the labyrinth of elevators to the top floor. And walked straight into the heart of his corporate empire. Not for mischief. Not for fun. But out of a love so fierce. Innocent. And determined it took his breath away. The intercom on his desk buzzed sharply. Mr. Whitmore. Your meeting with the finance team begins in 5 minutes. He pressed the button. His eyes never leaving Amy. Cancel it. There was a hesitant pause on the other end. Sir. All of it. He clarified. This morning's entire schedule. Clear it. Yes. Sir. He turned his full attention back to Amy. Are you hungry? She gave a little shrug. A gesture so childlike it almost made him laugh. Do you have apple juice? I think I can manage that. He walked to the sleek, hidden refrigerator behind a wood panel and pulled out a small bottle. She took it with both hands, whispering a polite, "Thank you," before hopping onto a leather bench near the expansive window, her little legs swinging high above the floor. Robert watched her quietly as she sipped her juice and stared out over the sprawling city. She looked so small against the vast skyline. Yet she had walked into his world with more purpose and heart than most adults he knew. He didn't know everything about her. Not yet. But something deep in his gut told him this moment wasn't random. It wasn't just a surprising interruption. It was the beginning of something significant. And he wanted to be a part of it. Miles away, a mother was lying on a crisp hospital bed. Pamela Morgan was only 24. But her eyes held a weary depth earned from surviving more than most women twice her age. She moved through the world with a quiet grace, accustomed to making herself invisible in crowded rooms. Her once envied golden hair was now hastily tied in a bun, and her soft smile often masked an exhaustion she carried like a second skin. Not long ago, she was a rising star, top of her class in computer science. She was praised for her brilliant logic and boundless creativity. She dreamed of startups, innovation, and success in Silicon Valley, where her code could change the world. But all of that vanished the moment she met him. He was older, a whirlwind of charm and empty promises. She was young, hopeful, and tragically unprepared for the heartbreak that followed. By the time she realized his love was a beautifully constructed lie, she was holding a positive pregnancy test in her shaking hands. When she told him, he disappeared. Her family, devout and inflexible, responded with cold, cutting shame. You're throwing your life away, her father had said, his voice devoid of warmth. Her mother wept, begging her to end it. But Pamela had already heard the faint, fluttering rhythm of the baby's heartbeat during a clinic visit. That was enough. That was everything. They disowned her a week later. She left with 2 suitcases and no safety net. The world outside her sheltered upbringing was colder than she ever imagined. She slept on couches, worked a string of odd jobs cleaning, babysitting, waitressing, anything to survive. Her body ached through the pregnancy. But each night she would whisper to her unborn child, "I'll never leave you. No matter what. It's you and me." Amy was born on a stormy January night in a crowded public hospital. A kind nurse was the only one there to gently place the tiny, perfect baby in her arms. In that sterile, lonely room, surrounded by the sounds of the storm and the beeping of machines, Pamela's world finally had a center. Over the next 5 years, Pamela rebuilt her life, piece by painful piece. When she landed the janitor job at Whitmore Tower, she took it with quiet, profound gratitude. It was grueling, thankless work. But it came with stable hours and, most importantly, health insurance. To her, that meant survival. It meant Amy could have a warm bed, food on the table, and a bedtime story every night. She worked the night shift, Long after the building emptied, she memorized the layout of every floor, every creaky elevator, every stubborn stain that never quite disappeared. No one in the gleaming offices knew her name. But the building sparkled because of her hands. Pamela was thin. Not from diet but from making sure Amy always ate first. Her immune system, weakened from long shifts and skipped meals, finally buckled when winter hit. She couldn't shake a lingering cough. But she ignored it. She had no other choice. But one morning, the pain in her chest grew sharp and terrifying. Every breath felt like fire. The room spun when she tried to stand. And she collapsed back into bed. Amy rushed to her side, her tiny hand gripping Pamela's. "Mommy, you're sick." Pamela tried to respond, but her voice cracked into a hoarse whisper. Their neighbor, Mrs. Collins, a kind, elderly woman, heard the wheezing through the thin walls and called for help. Within minutes, Pamela was in an ambulance. The world a blur of flashing lights and concerned faces. At the hospital, machines beeped a steady, unnerving rhythm around her. Doctors spoke in clipped, urgent voices about oxygen levels and lung inflammation. But Pamela didn't hear most of it. Her thoughts weren't on her condition. They were on the rent due next week, the groceries they desperately needed, the job she would surely lose if she missed another shift. She had given up everything: her family, her education, her dreams to raise Amy. The thought of losing it all now, because of something as simple and cruel as getting sick, filled her with a cold, clawing panic. She lay in the hospital bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles, whispering a single, desperate plea. "Please, don't let me lose everything I fought for." What Pamela didn't know, what she couldn't even begin to imagine, was that at that very moment, her daughter had already taken matters into her own small, capable hands. Wearing a too-large janitor's uniform and clutching a rag and a spray bottle, Amy was walking through the gleaming glass doors of Whitmore Tower. And with her tiny, determined footsteps, destiny had already begun to change. Robert had cancelled an entire morning of high-stakes meetings. But for once, he didn't feel the familiar pang of guilt that usually accompanied breaking his rigid schedule. Something about the little girl sitting near his window, sipping apple juice with her legs swinging high above the floor, made time itself seem irrelevant. He sat quietly, watching her finish the last drop and then meticulously wipe her mouth with the sleeve of her oversized uniform. Amy looked around his expansive office again, her head tilted with open curiosity. "Is it hard being the CEO?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Robert managed a faint smile. "Some days. It is. There's a lot to take care of." Amy nodded sagely, as if she understood the weight of his world. "Mommy says when you take care of something really big, it's important to remember the little things, too." He blinked. That sounded less like a 5-year-old and more like a profound life lesson disguised in pigtails. Amy stood up, carefully placing the empty juice bottle on the corner of his desk. "I think I should start now," she said with a seriousness that was both amusing and touching. "Mommy always starts with your desk. That way, she says. The big man upstairs has a clean start to his day." Robert raised an eyebrow but said nothing as she reached into a pocket of her uniform and pulled out a travel-sized packet of tissues. She unfolded one with delicate, precise fingers, laid it across her palm, and approached his desk with the solemnity of a surgeon preparing for a procedure. She began to wipe the polished mahogany surface with slow, circular motions. It was utterly endearing. Her tiny hands moved with the careful intent of someone imitating an action they had only observed but never practiced. Her technique was far from effective, and her pressure barely disturbed a speck of dust. But there was no mockery in her expression. She was focused, proud, and determined. Robert leaned his elbow on the armrest of his chair and watched, a warmth spreading through his chest. "You're very dedicated, Amy." She smiled without looking up from her task. "Mommy says when you do something, you should do it right, even if nobody sees it." That quiet wisdom, spoken so plainly, made something shift in him again, something soft and human that had been buried beneath years of guarded solitude. Then it happened. As Amy reached across the desk to wipe a corner near his laptop, her arm bumped a tall glass of water. It wobbled once, twice, then tipped over. The sound of the glass hitting the desk was small but sharp in the quiet office. Water spilled across the polished surface. A clear, creeping tide heading dangerously close to a folder of financial projections. Amy froze, her eyes widening in horror. Her hands hovered in the air as if afraid to touch anything else. I'm sorry," she gasped, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to help. Please don't fire Mommy. I was only trying to help." Robert stood up quickly, grabbing a stack of napkins and blotting the water just before it reached the folder. Then he turned to her. She looked up at him, her bottom lip quivering, her big eyes welling with tears. She had dropped the tissue and stepped back, bracing herself to be scolded or sent away. But instead, Robert knelt beside her. "Hey," he said gently, placing a dry napkin in her hand. "It's okay. I messed it up," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "You didn't," he said with a reassuring smile. "You were doing your best. That's what matters." She stared at him, unconvinced. He added, "Today, you've done more than most people twice your size. And for the record, you're the youngest employee I've ever had." That brought a flicker of hope back into her eyes. "Really?" she whispered. "Really. And I think you're doing a great job." Amy finally let out a shaky breath, the tension in her tiny shoulders melting away. She nodded solemnly, then carefully wiped a remaining drop of water from the desk. Robert stood and returned to his chair, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of connection. It was small, yes, but it was real. This child, with her floppy sleeves and honest eyes, had stepped into his sterile world and reminded him that kindness could still exist in the most unexpected places. As Amy continued dabbing the desk with newfound confidence, Robert leaned back and watched her. He had spent years building an empire of glass and steel. But in one clumsy moment, with a spilled glass and a child's heartfelt apology, remembered something far more valuable: humanity. And a spark of something unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting, stirred quietly in his chest. The morning after Amy appeared in his office, Robert could not concentrate. He sat at his desk, staring at a spreadsheet that had once consumed his every thought. But the numbers blurred. His mind kept drifting to a little girl in oversized clothes and a voice filled with courage beyond her years. He needed to know more. This wasn't about curiosity or corporate protocol. It felt deeply personal. He buzzed his assistant. "Find out which hospital Pamela Morgan was taken to yesterday morning and get me her room number." The assistant hesitated. "Sir. Would you like me to send flowers?" "No," Robert said quietly. "I want to visit her. By mid-afternoon." He stood outside a modest hospital room on the 5th floor of St. Mary's Medical Center. Through the narrow window in the door, he saw her. She was pale and still. But there was nothing fragile about her. A quiet strength emanated from the way her hand rested across her stomach. Her fingers curled slightly. Her face was turned toward the window. Her eyes open and distant. Her golden hair, though slightly disheveled, shimmered softly in the afternoon sunlight. He knocked gently. She turned. And at first, confusion flickered in her eyes. Then, recognition dawned. You're the CEO," she said. Her voice raspy as she tried to sit up. "Mr. Whitmore. Please," he said, stepping into the room and raising a calming hand. "Don't get up." She obeyed. But her cheeks colored with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry about Amy. She didn't mean any trouble. She just—" He shook his head. A genuine smile touching his lips. "She did nothing wrong." Pamela blinked, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "I met Amy yesterday," Robert continued, pulling the guest chair closer to the bed. "She walked into my office like she owned the place. Told me she was there to cover your shift." Pamela covered her mouth. A mixture of horror and affection in her eyes. "Oh my God." She even brought a rag and a spray bottle. A soft, almost tearful laugh escaped her. "She always pays attention. I never thought. She told me everything." Robert said. "That you were sick. That you might lose your job. She thought she could help. That if someone cleaned my desk, I wouldn't be so mad." Pamela lowered her eyes. Her voice barely a whisper. "I told her too much." "No," Robert said gently. "You taught her how to care." A comfortable silence settled between them. Then he added, "She told me a little about you. I hope you don't mind." Pamela glanced at him. Her eyes guarded. "What did she say?" "That you're the best mommy in the world." Her breath caught in her throat. Robert leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his demeanor open and sincere. "I wanted to hear your side, too." Pamela hesitated, then nodded slowly. Her voice was soft but steady as she told him everything. She spoke of her days as a promising computer science student, of falling in love with someone who left her the moment she revealed her pregnancy. She described the cold rejection from her family and the lonely, frightening years that followed. Wandering from place to place, working wherever she could, always carrying Amy on one hip and a fragile hope on the other. "I thought if I could just find one steady job, we'd be okay," she said, her gaze fixed on her hands. "The position at Whitmore Tower. It was the first time I felt like I could breathe. I never thought about who owned the building. I just knew I had to keep it." "And you did," Robert said quietly. She looked up, her eyes searching his face. He wasn't what she had expected. Not cold. Not distant or condescending. There was something in his Aissa's softness. Perhaps. Or maybe just genuine compassion. No one had looked at her like that in a long time. Not since before life had taken nearly everything from her. You must think I'm reckless, she murmured. Letting my daughter go out alone like that. No, he said, his voice firm. I think you've done more with less than most people ever have to. She blinked again, her eyes shimmering, glassy with unspoken emotion. Then, quietly, Robert said the words that would stay with her for years to come. You're the strongest person I've ever met. That broke the dam she had so carefully constructed. Tears welled up and slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. Pamela turned her face away slightly, trying to hide them. But her shoulders trembled with the release of years of pent-up fear and loneliness. Robert sat silently, not looking away, not trying to fix anything. He simply offered her the quiet dignity of being seen. I'm sorry, she whispered, brushing at her eyes. Don't be, he said softly. It was the first time in years that someone had called her strong and truly meant it. The first time someone had looked past the janitor's uniform, past the broken past, and simply saw her. Not the single mother. Not the girl who had fallen from grace. But Pamela. And in that quiet hospital room, as the afternoon sun streamed through the window, something shifted for both of them. Subtly and irrevocably. Something changed after the hospital visit. Robert told himself it was just residual concern. A matter of professional decency. But the truth lingered with him long after he left Pamela's room. He began walking through parts of the building he had never paid attention to before: maintenance corridors, janitor closets, quiet stairwells. Spaces he had once passed without a second thought now held a quiet importance. Pamela returned to work 2 weeks after her hospitalization. She was thinner than before. But her steps were steady. She moved with a quiet resolve. Her head down. Always efficient. And Robert, the man whose days were mapped out to the minute, started making unscheduled detours. He would check on renovations on the lower floors or review building cleanliness standards near the restrooms she was assigned to. Any excuse to walk by, to catch a fleeting glimpse of her. It was always brief. She would be kneeling beside a sink, wiping mirrors, or pushing a heavy mop along the hallway tile. Her golden hair would be tied back, a few strands always slipping loose to frame her cheeks. And even in her exhaustion, even in the silence of the empty corridors, there was something about her that stilled the chaos in his own mind. One morning, as he rounded the landing between the 19th and 20th floors, he saw her carrying a sloshing bucket up the stairs. The plastic handle was cutting into her fingers, and her steps were slow and careful. Without a word, he stepped forward and took it from her hands. Pamela startled, straightening up to look into his eyes. Mr. Whitmore. Let me, he said simply, already carrying it to the top of the flight. He set it down gently. She hesitated, unsure whether to protest or thank him. I was just on my way to check the HVAC reports on this floor, he offered. A lie so transparent it was almost charming. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. Of course you were. Their eyes met. And in that shared glance, something quiet but unmistakable passed between them, a spark of awareness. Of connection. Then Pamela, flustered, turned quickly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek before disappearing down the hall. The next afternoon, when she returned to the janitor's closet on the 15th floor, she found a clean, folded white towel sitting neatly on her supply cart. On top of it was a yellow sticky note, written in a bold, familiar handwriting. Don't forget to wipe your brow. Some of us noticed the effort. R. She stood perfectly still, pressing the soft towel lightly to her chest. She had never received a love note before. Not really. And certainly not one like this, simple, kind, and worded like genuine care instead of cheap charm. She tucked the note into the front pocket of her uniform. A small, warm secret pressed against her heart. Their encounters remained brief. Often wordless, a glance across a hallway, a nod in passing. But each moment hung in the air, heavier than it should have. One night, as the building emptied and Pamela was polishing the marble floor of the executive hallway, Robert stepped out of his office. Pausing in the doorway, she looked up, and their eyes locked. Neither of them moved. For a few charged seconds, the only sound was the hum of the building's ventilation. Then, something flickered between them, awareness, warmth, maybe even longing. But they both pulled back at the same time, as if the weight of the silent communication had startled them. Pamela dropped her eyes, mumbling a quick, "Good evening, sir," and turned away. Robert watched her walk toward the storage closet, her frame small but sure, then turned slowly and went back inside his office. Behind the closed closet door, Pamela leaned against the shelves, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was racing. She bit her lip to keep from smiling too wide. But it was no use. She wiped her face with the towel he had left her days ago, whispering to herself, "Get a grip, Pam." But the smile stayed. Across the hall, Robert stood behind the glass wall of his office, watching her shadow disappear down the corridor. His fingers rested on the edge of the doorframe, his jaw tight. She's kind, strong, real. He had spent his whole life in rooms filled with polished surfaces and hollow conversations, surrounded by people drawn to his title, not his truth. But Pamela, she was different. No performance, no pretense, just courage, resilience, and a quiet warmth that felt more real than anything he'd ever known. And without realizing it, Robert whispered aloud what had already settled quietly in his chest. "I think I'm falling for her." Just when things had begun to settle into something tender and unspoken, the past came knocking. His name was Daniel Carter. Pamela hadn't seen him in over 5 years. Not since the day she told him she was pregnant and he walked out without a single look back. She had stopped hoping for an apology long ago. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she saw him standing in the Whitmore Tower lobby, leaning casually against the marble reception desk as if he belonged there. "I heard you work here," he said with that same crooked smirk that used to charm her when she was too young to know better. "And I heard the CEO's got quite the soft spot for his janitor." Pamela froze, her blood running cold. "What do you want, Daniel?" He leaned in slightly, his voice a low, Predatory murmur. A second chance. Or maybe a first chance to be a part of Amy's life. I think I deserve that. Don't you? You left. She said. Her voice shaking with repressed anger. You never once called. You don't deserve anything. Daniel's expression hardened. The charm evaporating. I also heard Robert Whitmore is pretty generous to people he cares about. Maybe he could be generous to me, too. Pamela stared at him in disbelief. You're not here for her. You're here for money. He shrugged. Call it a settlement for my parental rights. Either way. If people start asking questions about your special relationship, I doubt your position here stays so secure. She walked away without another word. Her hands trembling. But it was too late. Within days, the whispers began, slithering through the cubicles and conference rooms. Did you hear about the janitor and the CEO? They say he visits her cleaning station every night. He canceled a board meeting for her. You know. In most companies, rumors came and went like the weather. But in Robert's world of billion-dollar mergers and razor-thin stock margins, perception was everything. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. You're compromising your objectivity, Robert. One member said. His tone accusatory. This woman is a liability. Another added coldly. There are murmurs in the media. You need to distance yourself from her immediately. If she stays, we risk reputational damage. The chairman warned. Investors don't like complications. Robert listened without speaking. His jaw set. His fingers steepled in front of him. When the voices finally quieted, he stood. His presence commanding the room. Let me make this crystal clear, he said. His voice calm but thunderous in its certainty. If Pamela Morgan is being targeted, disrespected, or removed from this company because of her association with me, then I will be the first to leave. Effective immediately. The room fell into a stunned silence. Robert's gaze moved from one shocked face to the next. She is not a liability. She is a human being. A mother. And one of the hardest working employees we have. And more importantly. He paused, letting the weight of his next words fill the air. She is the woman I love. Gasps rippled across the boardroom. I will not tolerate cruelty disguised as corporate policy, he added, his voice low and firm. And if that means this company loses a little comfort in the process, then so be it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one by one, heads began to lower in deference. No one challenged him. Word of the meeting spread like wildfire. But Pamela, her heart pounding with dread, was already packing her few belongings in the janitor's closet when Robert found her. I don't want to be the reason you lose everything, she whispered, blinking back tears. This job, this company, you've worked so hard. He stepped forward and gently took her hands in his. You are not the reason, he said, his voice soft and certain. You are the anchor. You are the first thing in a very long time that's made me feel like a person instead of just a position. She shook her head, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. You stood up for me. He smiled. A genuine, loving smile. You stood up for Amy. You stood up for yourself. For everything. You didn't think anyone noticed. But I did. And now. So does everyone else. And for the first time. She believed him fully. Completely. Because in the room where power ruled and titles commanded respect, Robert Whitmore had declared his heart. And hers was finally safe in it. The storm had passed. But Robert knew the damage Daniel could still cause if left unchecked. Quietly. He hired one of the best family law attorneys in the state, a woman with a formidable reputation for protecting single mothers and demolishing manipulative men in court. Together, they built Pamela's case. It was a fortress of evidence, years of solo parenting, financial independence, a consistent work history. Amy's school records and medical receipts irrefutable proof of a mother who had not only raised her child, but had done so with unwavering dignity in the face of complete abandonment. Daniel showed up to one preliminary hearing, looking smug and unbothered. But when he saw the powerhouse legal team waiting across from him, with Robert Whitmore seated quietly in the back of the courtroom, his gaze unflinching, that smirk slowly disappeared. 3 days later, Daniel officially withdrew his petition for custody. He never contacted Pamela again. With the legal battle behind them, Robert turned his attention to something even more meaningful, giving Pamela a future that matched her incredible potential. She had once mentioned her love for software, her long-lost dreams of finishing school, of building something that mattered. So, he created a new position at Whitmore Enterprises, technical advisor for internal digital transformation. And he offered it to her. At first, Pamela hesitated. I haven't touched code in years. I don't even know where to begin. Robert smiled. Begin right here. With us. We need someone who understands the human side of technology. Someone who knows what it means to build things from the ground up. He set up mentoring sessions with his top IT teams, bought her a state-of-the-art laptop, and gave her unlimited access to online courses and any resources she needed. And when she showed up for her first day in the new role, dressed in a simple navy blouse and fitted slacks, her hair down and her eyes shining with a steady light, every person in that department took notice. Pamela was different from the programmers who had coasted through their degrees. She asked questions no one else thought to ask. She cared about how the systems impacted the night staff, the overlooked departments, the very janitors who had once been her peers. Within a month, she had helped design a user-friendly interface that simplified the company's maintenance reporting software, cutting response times in half. People began to stop her in the hallway, not to ask for cleaning supplies, but for her opinion. And through it all, Amy bloomed. She came to the office every afternoon after preschool, skipping through the marble lobby like she owned it. She would wave to the security guards, deliver crayon drawings to Robert's office, and ride on his shoulders during lunch breaks in the company cafeteria. This place smells like mommy and smiles now, she said one day, twirling in the elevator. To Robert, nothing had ever sounded more right. At first, they were careful. Their new relationship quiet and private, a shared dinner here, a weekend walk in the park there. But over time, the boundaries blurred in the most natural way. Pamela would stay late working on a new prototype, and Robert would appear with coffee, made just the way she liked it. Amy started calling him Mr. Robert. Then just Robert. And finally, one evening without thinking, Dad. The night she said it, Pamela turned sharply. ready to gently correct her. But Robert's eyes were already filled with tears. He didn't correct her. He just knelt down and whispered, "I'd be honored." They weren't flashy or rushed. There was no grand public declaration or staged romance. Slowly, beautifully, they became a family. And in the quiet, everyday moments, morning coffee shared at the office cafe, Amy's laughter echoing through the halls, Pamela resting her head on Robert's shoulder in the elevator ride down, they found something none of them had even known they were looking for. Home. A year later, the epilogue. 1 year to the day after Pamela gave her first presentation. The city thawed into a glorious spring. Saturday mornings had become their favorite ritual. On one of those sun-drenched mornings, Robert announced a special picnic at the park. Pamela expected nothing more than sandwiches and sunlight. But under the shade of a quiet oak tree, after Amy had run off to chase butterflies, Robert turned to her. He didn't pull out a velvet box. Instead, he simply took her hand. "Pamela," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "A little over a year ago, a 5-year-old girl walked into my office and saved me. She brought me to you. And you taught me what strength really is. You showed me what love is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant gold ring with a single, deep blue sapphire that matched her eyes. "I don't need cameras or a big ceremony," he said softly. "I just need you. And Amy. I just need this life we've already started building. Will you marry me, Pamela?" Tears of pure happiness brimmed in her eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. Her answer was in her radiant smile, in the way she squeezed his hand. Amy, sensing the shift, ran back over and saw the ring. "Mommy, are you crying?" "Happy tears, sweetie." Pamela laughed, pulling her daughter into a hug. Robert drew Amy between them. "What do you think, sweetheart? Should we make it official?" Amy grinned. A brilliant, toothy smile. She grabbed both their hands and declared, "Yes. Mommy always said superheroes don't wear capes. But you're our superhero. Right, Dad?" Pamela looked at Robert, her heart full. He always has been. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair held in the very park where he proposed. Amy was the flower girl, scattering white petals with joyous abandon. There were no reporters, no board members, just a handful of close friends and the quiet promise of a lifetime together. That evening, Robert stood on the balcony of their new home, an apartment that overlooked the city lights, including the golden glow of Whitmore Tower in the distance. Inside, he could hear Pamela and Amy's laughter as they worked on a puzzle together. The sound like music to his soul. He breathed in the cool night air, a profound peace settling over him. He thought back to that fateful Monday morning. A little girl with golden curls and a janitor's uniform had walked into his life and brought with her the family he never knew he needed. He once thought he had everything, but he realized now he'd had nothing of true value. They didn't need rescuing. He did. And in choosing love over power, presence over pride, he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Amy ran out onto the balcony and wrapped her arms around his legs. "Can we go home now?" she asked. Then giggled. "Oh. Wait. We are home." Robert smiled, pulling her into his arms and kissing the top of her head. Yes. We are. He whispered, looking through the glass at Pamela, who was smiling back at him. Together. If this story of courage, love, and unexpected miracles touched your heart the way it touched ours, we invite you to become part of our growing community. Here at Soulstir Stories, we believe in the power of real, emotional, and inspiring tales that remind us of the quiet miracles waiting in our everyday lives. These are stories of resilience, of hope, and of the unbreakable human spirit. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that might just change the way you see the world. Join us on this journey to celebrate the moments that matter most. Because sometimes, the most profound changes begin with a single, quiet story. Thank you for watching.